Hey, so tonight we're going to start with a clip of Saul Alinsky stating that he would choose hell over heaven, and the main reason is pretty telling.
Take the business on the hereafter. Maybe there is, maybe there isn't. I've never seen the evidence one way or the other. I don't expect to see it during my lifetime. But if there is, I suppose given a choice, I think I would pick hell. The reason I'd pick hell is because that's where all the have-nots are. You know, the currency of the realm shifts. Over here it's money, over there it's virtue. But either way, if you haven't got it, you're stuck. And I've spent all my life with the have-nots. And once I got into hell, well, I'd start organizing, just like I do down here. And then I'd be in heaven personally, you know, because this is the thing that gives me the greatest happiness in life. And look out, heaven, here we come. I'm sure there are a lot of grievances that people down there have that should be worked out one way or another.
So, yeah, I just thought that was something. He said that he would choose hell so he could organize a demon rebellion and would try to overthrow heaven. Okay then. It's really no wonder the country is falling apart. The modern political class, on the left at least, well, they all seem to follow two schools of thought: the Alinsky Chicago machine or the California model. These two political factions have been subverting the country for damn near 50 years, with their rules for radicals ideology as their tactical handbook. They are currently on their final attempt at dissolving the United States and moving towards this global model. All I'm saying is that we should not be surprised that we are where we are, seeing as who their thought leaders were. I know, it's a little confusing there, but I think you get what I'm saying. Anyway, on the other side of the aisle, it's the same exact thing. The right is still pushing back on the neocon war agenda too. The fact remains that both political parties are filled with destructionists, and they are both all in on the military-industrial complex. However, a new dawn is rising, and I believe our view on the present and future can be summed up by two different perspectives. After all, life is about perspective. You can either take the black pill of doom and believe that even as these older politicians give one last stab at destroying national sovereignty, in favor of this global model, well, you could believe that the younger generation has been manipulated enough to carry on the torch. If you combine that with automation and technological advancement, well, you could believe that they'll eventually and successfully move us into technocratic rule. Or, on the other hand, you could have some hope. Yes, you could believe that the fourth turning, which we are currently in, offers a unique opportunity to root out corruption and to stop corporatism. Seeing as the truth is absolute, you could choose to believe that the masses are actually smart enough to handle the truth. I mean, not only that, you could have some hope that they would start to actively seek it out. Yes, you could believe that the establishment's desperation, the desperation that's clearly evident, will be their downfall, and that through this revelatory power of disassembling the myriad of lies that lay the foundation to their entire political agenda, well, that in doing so, people will wake up. Yes, you could believe that the masses will ultimately reject convenience culture, and instead demand freedom rather than the same old economic subjugation, this time thinly veiled by virtue signals. Now, I choose the latter. I have a hard time believing that they can keep up the lies and keep reality from hitting everybody in the face. As of right now, though, their desperation is reaching all-time highs, and that's what we're going to start with tonight, the new Trump indictments. Now, don't stop watching the video yet. I know you've heard quite a bit about this subject, so we're going to take a different approach, simply because I don't really think people consider how the world really works. Disclaimer, this is just my perspective, my view on the world, so please let me know if you think I'm wrong about any of it. First of all, always consider the timing of political events. As every single person was talking about Joe and Hunter Biden, they indicted Trump again. In fact, check out this timeline right here. The moment that some bad news about Joe Biden comes out, a new indictment drops. It happens every single time, the very next day. As a result, the news cycle is dedicated to Trump. And while the Bidens, well, they get lost in the fray. What a perfect situation for them, right? It's pretty amazing what can happen when you have state-run media running cover for you. Just remember that they wargame everything. Nothing is a coincidence when it comes to politics. It's all carefully curated news and deliberate timing to obfuscate the truth. After all, they do have to keep you distracted and prop up the narrative at the same exact time. A perfect example of how insidious everything is in politics is summed up in one clip from Nancy Pelosi. Right here, we can listen to her explain how they coordinate a wrap-up smear.
And it's a diversionary tactic. It's a self-fulfilling prophecy. You demonize, and then we call it the wrap-up smear. If you want to talk politics, you call it the wrap-up smear. You smear somebody with falsehoods and all the rest, and then you merchandise it. And then you write it, and they'll say, see, it's reported in the press that this, and this So they have that validation that the press reported the smear, and then it's called the wrap-up smear. Now I'm going to merchandise the press's report on the smear that we made. And it's a tactic, and it's self-evident.
Yes, I believe we have to remind ourselves not to be naive, and I'm serious. I mean, I get caught up in it sometimes too. However, we do have to remember that the world is not as simple as it's presented to us by the media. What I mean is this. If you're over, let's just say 25, and still believe that the world is basic right versus left, that one side of the aisle is a bunch of angels, and the other side are the only ones who are quote-unquote bad, then I don't know what to tell you. You went wrong somewhere, stuck in Arrested Development. Everything we are seeing is much bigger than superficial tribalism. It's about much, much more. Personally, in my humble opinion, it can be summed up by differences in foreign policy and economics. Now, when I say that out loud, it sounds so obvious, but hear me out. You know, we hear a lot of talk about what really happened with the Kennedy assassination. Some believe it was that moment that the presidency became this spokesman type of position, simply the front man to the machine, the public face to the military-industrial complex and intel agencies. However, there's a couple of different ways to look at it. Some believe this was always the case with the US presidency. Some believe that a group of shadow bankers and special interests started pulling the strings after 1913 with Woodrow Wilson. After all, Woodrow Wilson did say, and I quote, "I am a most unhappy man. I have unwittingly ruined my country. A great industrial nation is controlled by its system of credit, and our system of credit is concentrated. The growth of the nation, therefore, and all of our activities are in the hands of a few men. We have come to be one of the worst ruled, one of the most completely controlled and dominated governments in the civilized world. No longer a government by free opinion, no longer a government by conviction, and no longer a government by the vote of the majority, but a government by the opinion and duress of a small group of dominant men." End of quote. So, I do believe this was a pivotal moment in history. It was the moment that this global government idea really came into itself. You know, it was through his confidant, Mendel House, the League of Nations, that they laid this groundwork for the idea of global socialism, which Woodrow Wilson specifically wrote about. It has since transformed into a sort of techno-fascism, stakeholder capitalism, merging corporations with governments and having society managed by artificial intelligence. However, you've heard me croon about that topic quite a bit. So, while 1913 was a pivotal moment, I don't think the government was entirely co-opted at that moment. I think we were still in sort of like this ebb and flow stage. So, when they got a sympathetic ideologue into power, they took advantage and inched a little bit closer. A tit-for-tat type of deal. So yeah, as of 1913, I don't think the global government ideal was embedded within each political voice just yet. Yeah, we have a couple different stops along the way to our current situation. I personally believe that something equally nefarious occurred when George H.W. Bush got into office. Oddly enough, or I should say it's really not odd at all seeing as George H.W. Bush is connected to the Kennedy assassination. However, I believe something changed from that moment on. I'm pretty sure he's the guy that ceded complete power over to the intel agencies. And well, that's what you get when you elect a guy from the CIA into the presidency, right?
We have before us the opportunity to forge for ourselves and for future generations a new world order, a world where the rule of law, not the law of the jungle, governs the conduct of nations. When we are successful, and we will be, we have a real chance at this new world order, an order in which a credible United Nations can use its peacekeeping role to fulfill the promise and vision of the UN's founders.
Anyway, after his proclamation of a new world order, every president after him worked towards that same exact goal. I mean, okay, so we had George H.W. Bush, and then we had Bill Clinton.
After 1989, President Bush kept said, and it's a phrase that I often use myself, that we needed a new world order.
And then, of course, we got George W. Bush.
We must stop the terror. I call upon all nations to do everything they can to stop these terrorist killers. Thank you. Now watch this drive. All right.
And then we had Obama.
This, as the president pledged to shape, quote, a new international order. Brian Moore is in D.C. with details.
Addressing the graduating cadets at West Point, President Obama called for a new U.S. role on the world stage.
So we have to shape an international order that can meet the challenges of our generation.
The speech comes a few days before the president lays out his first national security strategy. He seemed to be dismissing the doctrine of President George W. Bush while echoing a phrase made famous by the first President Bush.
We have before us the opportunity to forge for ourselves and for future generations a new world order.
The international order we seek is one that can resolve the challenges of our times.
Not just challenges like the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan or the smoldering economic crisis in Europe.
As influence extends to more countries and capitals, we also have to build new partnerships and shape stronger international standards and institutions.
Familiar words foreshadowing a new worldview, certain to stir plenty of debate here at home. The speech also had a mission accomplished moment. President Obama says U.S. combat duties in Iraq are expected to wrap up this summer. Brian Moore, NBC News, Washington.
And Hillary Clinton was supposed to win in 2016. All of them moved us closer to where we are right now. After all, after the 2008 economic collapse, the idea of this great reset really started to kick into high gear, with Klaus Schwab initially announcing the plan back in 2014, during Obama's presidency. A coincidence? I don't think so. They all moved us closer to this 2030 target date.
What we want to do in Davos this year in this respect is to push the reset button. Let me explain.
Which, of course, as we know, started in the early 1970s. The timeline is as follows. This all happened between 1970 and 1975. So the World Economic Forum is formed. The US moves off the gold standard. Debt explodes. So right after that, the Limits to Growth is published by the Club of Rome, which is their blueprint for the climate agenda.
The planet can support something like 1 billion people, maybe 2 billion, depending on how much liberty and how much material consumption you want to have. If you want more liberty and more consumption, you have to have fewer people. And conversely, you can have more people. I mean, we could even have 8 or 9 billion probably if we have a very strong dictatorship, which is smart. That's, unfortunately, you never have smart dictatorships. They're always stupid. So, but if you had a smart dictatorship.
And then right after that, in 1973, the population bomb enters the zeitgeist, which highlights that population growth is going to destabilize the world by 2030. What a coincidence.
We had formed an organization called Zero Population Growth, and then Johnny took me on The Tonight Show.
Would you welcome Dr. Paul Ehrlich?
You have to get the death rate and birth rate in balance, and there's only 2 ways to do it. One is to bring the birth rate down, the other is to push the death rate up.
I did the show maybe 20 times, and we went from 6 chapters and 600 members to 600 chapters and 60,000 members.
We're starting in now. This is the first step.
The Bagleys belong to a growing number of young marrieds who favor ZPG, Zero Population Growth.
How many children do you have? 2. I have 2 children.
Ehrlich's views on how to bring the birth rate down were concrete. Compulsion if voluntary methods fail. Creating a blacklist of people, companies, and organizations impeding population control in the U.S. Responsibility prizes for childless marriages. A tax on children. And a luxury tax on diapers and cribs.
The concerns about population became misanthropic. And it was taken with so much seriousness that Paul Ehrlich could recommend things like putting stuff in public water that would make people not as fertile.
Panic is not too strong a word to use for some of the advocates that I referred to as true believers.
It was a zeitgeist that was taking shape.
Attention, all citizens. Childbearing is herewith forbidden.
One of the things about zeitgeists is they have astonishing durability.
It appears that large families are on the way out, and ZPG may be possible.
Zero population growth is a tragic frame in the sense that it was assumed that there was no way out, that people would just go on reproducing until there really was a desperate circumstance in the world.
Ehrlich's message could be summed up in a dramatic prediction.
Sometime in the next 15 years, the end will come. And by the end, I mean an utter breakdown of the capacity of the planet to support humanity.
And then, in the early 1990s, another book by the Club of Rome is published. It was written by Alexander King and Bertrand Russell. This book is entitled The First Global Revolution. And in that book, they outline how they can change the economic structure of the world through climate change narratives. And I quote, "Due to the sudden absence of traditional enemies, new enemies must be identified. In searching for a new enemy to unite us, we came up with the idea that pollution, the threat of global warming, water shortages, famine, and the like would fit the bill. All of these dangers are caused by human intervention, and it is only through changed attitudes and behavior that they can be overcome. The real enemy then is humanity itself." End of quote. So check out this timeline right here. That book was published in 1991. Right after that, the Earth Summit in Rio in 1992 happened, which we have talked about. Nancy Pelosi in the United States signed on to Agenda 21 and Agenda 2030.
The Earth Summit Environmental Leadership Act, as this is known, presents us with an opportunity to follow up on the important work of the Earth Summit to develop its blueprint, Agenda 21, for global environmental action.
I mean, that's pretty crazy timing. And don't forget, this is also during George H.W. Bush's presidency before the baton was passed to Bill Clinton. So my point is pretty simple. They have been working on this plan for a long, long time, and they aren't going to give up on this idea easily. So really, when you threaten their agenda, their foreign policy, well, that's when they conspire against you. And I believe that's what we're seeing with Trump. Yeah, I think this has a lot to do with foreign policy. So let's break it down a little bit more. Now, local and state representatives are a little bit different, but let's talk about the national level. The way I see it is that the job of the politician is to perpetuate the dollar as the global reserve and to keep the machine moving forward. And so, at the federal level, there is no principle, there is no moral framework. It's simply about power on the global stage. And when it comes to this, there's really not a fundamental difference between the two major parties, at least at the top level. We have a Uniparty, the establishment, and the rest of it's mostly political theater to satiate their bases domestically while foreign policy moves forward as planned. For example, Joe Biden follows the same U.S. foreign policy objectives dating back to the early 1990s. Again, we had George H.W. Bush and then Bill Clinton. Of course, we then got Little Bush and then Obama. And, as I said, Hillary Clinton was supposed to be next, and she was going to usher us into the age of 2030. Now, their timeline is a little screwed up since Trump won in 2016, but now since Biden's in office, so I believe they're all following the same exact plan towards Bush's New World Order.
Our country is going through a transition. A new world order, a new set of challenges is confronting us, both domestically and abroad. It will take some time to sort our way through it.
The historic role in trying to make sure that there is, after all, a new world order.
And the phenomenal opportunities before us to create a real new world order.
Thank you very much, Richard, and I am delighted to be here in these new headquarters. I have been often to, the mothership in New York City, but it's good to have an outpost of the council right here down the street from the State Department. We get a lot of advice from the council, so this will mean I won't have as far to go to be told what we should be doing and how we should think about the future.
We all talk about a new world order, about what the Clinton administration's foreign policy will be, what this so-called new world order will look like.
Of course, as is always the case, it's all supported and underpinned by guys like Henry Kissinger.
So that the problem of the Bush presidency will be the emergence of a new international order.
Within the next 4 years, we will see the emergence of a new international order.
The beginning of a new international order.
The pieces are in flux. Soon they will settle again. Before they do, let us reorder this world around us.
I think his task will be to develop an overall strategy for America in this period when really a new world order can be created. It's a great opportunity. It isn't just a crisis.
It's about the future of Europe and a new world order.
There's a need for a new world order, but it has different characteristics in different parts of the world.
But today, with Asia already outproducing Europe, India and China are clearly becoming part of our new order.
We are now facing a common challenge. And the challenge is how to build a world order for the first time in history on a global basis.
Now, there is one main thing we have to remind ourselves about. That's the fact that military objectives, agendas pushed by intel agencies, etc., well, these things take decades and decades to play out. They span multiple administrations. So, more than likely, it's all dictated by military, intel agencies, and, places like the Council on Foreign Relations. So, within the modern era, with every single presidency, the constant is foreign policy. It never seems to change. That is, until Trump came along. You see, Trump started no new wars. He tried to pull troops out, and while he was doing that, he was actively being lied to by the US military about those troop numbers. It was a part of some treasonous and insane plan to keep troops in foreign nations against the direction of the president. Now we also had the Abraham Accords, trying to set up peace in the Middle East. These things really pissed off the powers that be. Now, I don't know for sure, but hypothetically, let's just say that Obama really did believe in ending the forever wars. If that is the case, then after he won the presidency, we have to assume that someone sat him down and explained, how things really worked. And then what do you know? More drone bombings than Bush. He started 7 different wars. Millions and millions were killed. Anyway, my point is that believing in tabletop politics is rather naive. The world is not as simple as it seems. And really, every single adult should already know that they are being fleeced by both political parties. You should know this next bit also, and if you don't, this may shock you. But the political currency in DC is corruption. The entire district sells access. That's their only commodity, political access. It really does seem like they're all corrupt in some manner. And it's just crazy to see people who claim to believe that Joe Biden is the only guy who's above it all. I just cannot relate to the mentality. I mean, come on. Let's put it this way. If you put every single politician from both parties into a room and threw something at the crowd, there is nearly a 100% chance you will hit a corrupt politician. I bet there's only, and I'm truly being generous here, about 10% of people in each party that are really on the up and up. And even then, they understand the game, so when shit goes down, they remain silent. After all, they don't want to end up dead, do they? It sounds hyperbolic, but I wouldn't be surprised if this is a rather common conversation. You might want to be careful. Accidents do happen around here. Or what about this one? Mr. Politician, I'd like to remind you that you can never be sure where the cameras are. Wink, wink. Anyway, it's just really interesting to see how everything plays out. There's a lot of psychology at play too. On the individual level, we have social pressure, which has been exacerbated ever since social media took over as the town square too. So yeah, through fanning the flames of political tribalism, a hell of a lot of people have just accepted being ruled by corrupt assholes in exchange for some kind of social benefit. You gotta be one of the tribe, I guess. The quote-unquote journalists, media figures, and politicians just see it for what it is. It's a game of power and greed. They know the game and have all become power mad too. And quite frankly, they're a bit delusional. After all, there is a real ideological slant here too. However, here's how I see it. You see stuff like this all the time on social media. They say things like this. Look, even people within his party are denouncing him as a traitor. And yeah, but you don't seem to get it. Very, very few people were ever on the side of populism. All of these politicians fake support and then undermine their own movement. They undermine their own constituents by siding with the establishment. It happens damn near every time. It's all two-faced doublespeak. Just look at their voting records in the Senate or House. They do not mean anything they say to on the campaign trail. Now, don't get me wrong, this goes for both parties, especially when a politician advocates against war. No one, and I repeat, no one in the establishment wanted Trump to win because it threatened foreign policy objectives, their wartime agenda. When your economy is propped up by the petrodollar, well, that means that war makes the world go round. And on top of that, they can't have someone whose actions could destabilize the liberal economic order before they are ready to move on to this new carbon-based economy. It needs to be a slow devaluation of the dollar. If change happens too fast, the people might start to realize the game. It's all about slow, incremental change. The frog boiling in the pot, you know? So, for Republican politicians, they have to toe the establishment line, but they also cannot isolate their voter base. It was a fine line to walk, and well, they all failed. We all know who the fake ones are now, that's for sure. Yes, the Uniparty establishment is very, very real. So, the scandal with FTX perfectly encapsulates what we're dealing with. So, if you don't know, during the UFO hearings that were going on, the Department of Justice dropped charges against Sam Bankman-Fried. Typically, distractions still work pretty well for the establishment. However, for the Uniparty, nothing seems to work as well as it used to. And that right there provides us with an opening. Anyway, the former crypto king made one of the biggest donations to the Biden campaign in 2020. He was second to only George Soros. And really, it's a clear example of our two-tier system at work. So, do you remember the clip of Maxine Waters blowing this guy a kiss? Yeah, well, it was both sides, the establishment in its purest form. So, this guy, Sam Bankman-Fried, didn't only give $300,000 to the House committee members who were actively investigating him. No, he also gave millions to Kevin McCarthy. Millions went to Mitch McConnell. The whole Uniparty is on the take. The entire system is corrupt to its core. They laundered our tax money back to themselves through FTX. And they are going to let him walk with a slap on the wrist. Just you watch. So remember kids, if you want to commit fraud, make sure you reach out and pay off your local, state, and national leaders first. Anyway, my point is that all of this ties into their plans to establish a carbon-based economy. Yes, the Uniparty establishment has a plan to combat the rise of the BRICS gold-backed system. And yes, that plan is resting solely on the shoulders of this global carbon-based system. And therefore, it's all predicated on their climate change agenda. Climate change is an economic plan above everything else. This is how they maintain power on the global stage, with places like Saudi Arabia and the BRICS nations moving away from the petrodollar. And in fact, the BRIC nations just announced that they are once again expanding. Their economic alliance is growing. Right now, it's not really a threat, but that's not going to last too long. So to finish up, just remember that this is much bigger than just Trump and Biden. It's all about a global realignment and a power struggle of epic proportions. So, up next, we have to talk about some developments with the Great Reset. However, until then, once again, this is HelioWave. If you like the content, like, comment, and subscribe. Share the video if you want to. If you're in a position to, consider subscribing on Locals or Subscribestar. As always, make sure you disobey those true fascistas, and yes, I do hope you have a good night.